Good morning. Hello. Welcome to the IVF Loss and Fertility Struggles panel. My name is Cassie Destino. I am a certified fertility doula and I am the founder of IVF Support UAE. I'm joined today by one of my dearest friends and colleagues, Hazel Leonard. She is a fertility educator and midwife from the UK. She's been in the UAE for 11 years. She's designed a fertility program called the Prepared Pineapple, which supports and guides people through the process of infertility. Hazel and I have both supported many women through their IVF process, as well as both of us being IVF veterans ourselves. I have had 4 IUIs and 3 IVFs in order to conceive my now 7-year-old twins. And Hazel has a 3-year-old son and a 6-month-old daughter, also from IVF. We are also joined by Lisa Fleischer. She's from New Jersey in America. She's been living in Dubai off and on since 2018, and she's a journalist for Bloomberg News. Her 3-year-old daughter is an IVF baby, and now she's 40, and she's got pregnant with another little girl coming in January after some losses. She's previously lived in London. Lisa, why don't you start by telling us your IVF story? It's a bit of a doozy. Would you mind sharing it with us?
Sure. It's so funny you describe it as a doozy because I just think it's very normal. But when I think I got married, I hope my husband doesn't hear this because I can't remember. I was 34, 35, something like that. And we were like, oh, well, we'll have fun for a year and then we'll try to get pregnant. And then we tried and we're trying for like over a year. And we're like, I was just very frustrated. I think the hardest part of infertility for me was the waiting and like feeling like my life was on hold. So I started thinking about IVF and I was living in London at the time. So I went to a private gynecologist to start talking about that because it was easier at the time. I had access to private healthcare, easier for me in London to go private. Turns out like just shortly after that, I became pregnant, but I didn't know it because it was an ectopic pregnancy. And it was a really difficult, scary, life-threatening situation. Luckily, I had been going to the private gynecologist. She knew exactly right away like what was going on, sent me in for surgery. So I had surgery where they removed a fallopian tube. And the the sort of surprising thing for me after that was that it was still possible to get pregnant, the sex way. But at that point, it was just a month literally before I was set to move to Dubai. I was really tired of waiting. So once we got settled in Dubai, went to my gynecologist here and asked her about, IVF. And she said, let's try some, Clomid. We tried that for a couple of months. And then eventually I was like, no, let's just go right to it. And she was like, yep, let's go right to it. So, I mean, we tested my husband. He had small, potentially possible issues, but like, really, it wasn't anything other than I think my age. At that point, I'm probably 36. And so I then went to Bourne Hall Clinic here in Dubai. And first round was in February of 2019. Yes, 2019. And did not work very well. It was like a total bust, basically. I had like one blastocyst. And if you're involved now in IVF, you know what that is. And that didn't take. And then the second round was much better. I got a bunch of embryos and we had one fresh transfer, which became my daughter, Simone. Fast forward, I had another egg retrieval in the US, moved back to Dubai, did an egg retrieval, started with my like embryos here that were frozen because when I left Dubai originally, it wasn't possible to take your embryos out of Dubai, but now it is. So that's why we did the egg retrieval in New York. Anyway, so we used the embryos that we had frozen here. And unfortunately, I had just trigger warning, I had 2 losses. And I'll explain them. The first one, these were untested embryos, by the way, which I think is a really important distinction to make and something you really need to think about when you're going through IVF. The first one became an ectopic pregnancy, another ectopic. 2 main risk factors for ectopic pregnancies are IVF for some reason. I don't really think they know why, but IVF, and also having a previous ectopic. So I had both of those risk factors, And it wasn't just any ectopic pregnancy. It was a particularly bad one. It was in my uterus, which I did not know was possible. It was in the cornual area. So if this is your uterus, wait, let me try to make this straight. It was like in the kind of part here that connects to your fallopian tube. So I had to have surgery to take that out. And excuse me. Then the second loss was like about 6 months later, maybe 9 months later or something like that. We had to, and again, with the waiting, with that ectopic pregnancy, I had to wait for my uterus to heal, which I had a kid already. So it was, to be honest, it wasn't as difficult, but still waiting is for me, the hardest part of all this. And so I got pregnant again with a single embryo. It split into twins. And for some unknown reason, again, this was not a tested embryo. One stopped growing at around 5 or 6 weeks. The other one stopped growing about like 9 weeks. So unfortunately, I had a miscarriage there. Did another egg retrieval because at that point, I feel like I'm running out of embryos. I'm a little bit worried. And then I got pregnant again at some point with my now daughter. That's coming in January. So sorry, that was kind of a long explanation, but that's basically my history. So the reason why I feel like it's not that complicated or not that complex is that I didn't have like a lot of medical issues that were, compounding anything. All I had was the same thing that everybody who does IVF deals with, which is numbers and time and waiting and age and chance. I mean, some of my embryos, oh, I forgot to mention the most recent egg retrieval I did, tested embryos. So that was easier for me then because I was 39 when I had the retrieval. I knew which embryos to go with. This is most likely to become a pregnancy. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I had some bad luck along the way, but in general, I feel very lucky that I basically have like, I don't know, I kind of consider it like a third success rate with my transfers. So that's my story.
Hazel, do you want to share a little bit about your IVF story?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, it's interesting that Lisa says, "Oh yeah, it's the normal story," and it's so difficult because I don't, none of it feels normal, if that makes sense. And everybody's path is often, we have this just do IVF statement, and it impacts everybody so differently, and yet it's so relatable when you're going through it. So my story is quite different from Lisa's. So we did kind of a similar thing. I got married at 30, put off trying because I wanted to go on my honeymoon and I didn't want to be pregnant on my honeymoon, that arrogance. And then when we started trying, nothing was happening. Second kind of story. Went for tests like 9 to 12 months. No issues, no concerns, unexplained infertility. Did some IUI, didn't work. Did a round of IVF. At that time as well, we were in the UAE and you couldn't freeze embryos. So I think from our first cycle, we had 2 or 3 embryos. And on the day, they were like, "Oh yeah, we're just going to put 2 back in." And I was terrified of having twins. As a midwife, I knew the risk factors involved with having twins. And I was just like, no, this is my first round. I only want 1. Excuse me, sorry. And so we had 1 and then the others got thrown away. And that was unsuccessful. I wasn't happy with the care that I received in Dubai, so waited for some time and then went back to the UK and had a round in the UK. My husband's morphology always came back as it's supposed to be. So morphology is like the shape of the sperm, and you're supposed to have 4% or more that are normal, which is not very many when you're looking at, if you're looking at 100% of the sample, you only need 4% of them to be a normal shape. But when you're dealing with millions of sperm and you only need 1, you expect it to be okay. But his was about 2%, 1 or 2%. So there was still a chance. Nobody really cared that much about it. And again, in that cycle, on day 3, we had like 5, 6 embryos. And then by day 5, we had 1. And it was terrible quality, but they said, "Oh, let's just put it in anyway." And that didn't work either. And then each time I did find it incredibly hard. I found going through the process of IVF extremely difficult. So I always needed time. I wasn't one of these people that were like, right, that didn't work that month, so I'm going to do another one next month. Financially, it was also really tough. So in between each one, we waited a while. And by the third one, I actually met Cassie just before we did our third one. And she recommended a wonderful doctor who took us seriously and said, okay, let's actually do some further tests to see if we can find out what's going on. Male factor was diagnosed and focused on and treated. And then it was another 6 months before we did our final round of IVF, or ICSI, should I say. And in that round, on day 5, we had 3 relative, like good quality embryos. They looked good quality. There's obviously a difference between tested embryos and how they look on day 5. We didn't have them genetically tested. I was 35 at the time. And as we'd found the issue and treated the issue, we were, hopeful that they would be successful. And we'd had the first one transferred, and he's now my 3-year-old son. And then this time last year, we had the second transferred, and I now have a 6-month-old daughter. So I'm very lucky that out that final cycle, we had good quality embryos, and I was very, very, very lucky that I have 2 children from it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a thing with IVF, that when you are starting it, I don't think that we're always aware of how many variables there are coming down the road at us. Mm-hmm. And if you feel prepared to have an IVF, if your doctor explains it, or you've gone out and found, support to help you understand it, there's still so many things, we don't always know about testing at the beginning, of our journey. That, do we need to, should we? And, I wonder, Lisa, if you can talk about how prepared do you feel like you were before you started embarking on IVF? Did you know what was coming? Were you surprised by things? Can you talk about how ready you felt for IVF before you started IVF?
Well, how ready are you is a tough one, because emotionally I was ready. I leaned heavily on support groups. I found the right Facebook groups for me that had sort of like my people in it, the ones that I felt personally, I felt like I am much more, I'm much more sort of a science-based person. So instead of lots and lots of hope, I just wanted answers. So, and I found places where I could go that they would give me science-based answers. I found the Dubai IVF group, which was very helpful as well. And so I learned along the way. I listened to a podcast. It's called Matt and Dory's Excellent Adventure, if you want to look that up. It's very kind of a laid back thing. When I went in for my first consultation, because I just consulted with 2 different clinics, the doctor basically drew me a picture of the uterus and stuff like that. And I was just, I learned a lot. But I'll tell you that the amount that I know now compared with the amount I knew then is, I feel like I've gotten a university degree. Just to take you back a little bit, when I had my first ectopic pregnancy in the UK, I feel really stupid saying this right now, but I took a pregnancy test and it was positive. I have a picture of it because I'm kind of a weirdo that takes pictures and just keeps pictures of everything. But I've looked at some point a couple of years down the line, I went back and I looked at that pregnancy test and it had a faint line. And at the time, I didn't know what that meant. I thought the picture on the box says, if you have 2 lines, that means you're pregnant. And if you have 1 line, it means you're not. So I thought that was 1 line. But now I know actually a faint line means you're pregnant. So I could have gotten care earlier if I had known better, if I had been better informed. But I think there are so many questions and so many common questions that are asked in IVF, such as, which doctor is the best doctor? Should I do genetic testing? Should I do acupuncture? All these things that are asked over and over again. And just by basically immersing myself in the Facebook groups that I felt comfortable with, and finding friends who had done it. Some people had shared their story on Facebook or on Instagram really, and I'd reached out to a couple of close friends from like even elementary school that I hadn't talked to in a while. And having somebody, like Cassie or Hazel, to just basically ask questions at any time and get good answers and not be afraid to ask what I think are dumb questions was immensely helpful. So on the, just to answer your question, on the one hand, I felt like I'm ready, but there was just so much that I had to learn.
Yeah. Hazel, how about you? I mean, you were coming from a midwife background, so you knew about functions in women's bodies and the way things are supposed to be. Was there anything that you found surprising about your IVFs?
Yes, definitely going to the first one was the lack of information. Obviously, as a midwife, I'm informed about the biology and conception and how it works when everything's going fine, but I didn't know about IVF because I'd never done it before. So when the doctor I was seeing was lovely, but he tried to use an analogy of the eggs are getting ready in the dressing room, and then one of them's going to come out and they're going to be the star of the show, and that was lovely if that's the way your mind worked, but that's not how I work. I wanted the facts, I wanted the biology, and I wanted the information. And he kind of said, oh, we don't give out leaflets because nobody reads them. That's not your decision. That's not your decision to make. And I found my questions were dismissed, and I found that Google was my resource. And that's why I ended up doing what I do now, because there aren't any, like Lisa was saying, I have these stupid questions. There's no stupid questions. We are not educated about this. We don't know about this. People don't talk about this when they're going through it. So if you've never had a discussion with anybody about IVF, how are you going to know about it, if that makes sense? So even as a medical professional, I was completely blind going in, knowing what to expect.
Yeah. I mean, I went through, so I did 3 IVFs, and the first one was in San Francisco, and the way that clinic was that we had like compulsory classes we had to go to. We understood everything, that our nurse made us a printed calendar that was like, this day at this time you take this dose of this drug, and it was like, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then and so at any time in that cycle, my husband and I could be like, we know what's going on. And then that one ended up resulting in a miscarriage. So we had to do another one. But by then we were living in Abu Dhabi. And my husband and I said to each other many times, if we hadn't have just gone through this, we would have no idea what was going on, that we were not given any information. And I don't know if that's because the doctor knew that we'd been through it before, but there were so many times that I thought, I'm really glad I know what to ask right now. And I think that's a big part of why I do the work that I do now, because it was such a baffling experience, and I knew what was coming, and and it was a really different cycle too than my first one. Hazel, can you talk a little bit about your choice to help women, to empower them? Was it because you had gone through that experience, or what's motivated you to start the Prepared Pineapple and to be working with women and families to achieve pregnancy and parenthood?
Yeah, and I think the key word there that you've said is choice. Giving people choice in this is really important to me. I've done so much work in my career about prenatal education and preparing for birth and postnatal support and breastfeeding. And then when it came to IVF, I didn't feel there was anything. There was nothing. And I'm like, how can something that is impacting so many millions of people day in, day out, how can there be so little in comparison to birth? And it's almost like birth is celebrated because it's wonderful and it's amazing, and everybody loves pregnancy, but nobody seemed to be focusing on IVF. And I just felt like there was a massive void. And if I could help support people going through it, that felt that feel clueless and want to ask those apparent stupid questions, then that's why I love what I do. Because if you can make this really difficult journey, because it's not wonderful and amazing, and it's very difficult, it's very challenging, and there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of questions. If I can make that easier for women, couples, anyone going through it, then that's why I do what I do.
Yeah. Lisa, you've talked about how you found some support when you were going through yours. Is that something that you would recommend, that people look for people like Hazel, or look for people like yourself, just, women that have gone through it that are able to share? Does that feel like an important part of your journey?
Yes, 1,000%. It is very similar in my opinion. And if anybody out there is already a mother, they might relate to this, but after giving birth, it's kind of like you sort of like, okay, I have this baby, now what do I do with it? It's a very similar thing where like there's so much more that you need, and you do need support from other people going through the same thing, or who have gone through the same thing. Just questions to ask. And I think, Cassie, what you said about your experience between the San Francisco clinic and the difference with the Abu Dhabi clinic is just, I mean, heartbreaking is maybe not the right word, but it's painful because everyone has different learning styles. Let's just say that. And if and like I never got something, and I always wanted something that was like a spreadsheet, basically. Okay, here's because the medications alone are so confusing and so difficult, and like the nurses kind of like it's the language they know, but this is your first time doing this. And even now, I've gone through several retrievals, and I still have to like remember, I still have to set up like alarms for myself and everything. And if you don't have someone to ask these questions, or bounce things off of, there's a lot you might miss, and it feels a lot less lonely when you do have somebody. And questions like, there was something recently in a group, and I don't remember if it was your group or another. I think it was our group. People were talking about how, gosh, my sister or my sister-in-law, she's just gotten pregnant, and I don't know why. I just feel so just awful about myself, and I don't know why I can't be happy for her. And the thing is, like, how would you know that that is an extremely common feeling if you didn't have other people to talk to about this? It is an extremely common feeling, and it is normal and natural. And it doesn't mean you're not happy for your, sister or friend or whoever, but it's a very, very valid feeling. So I never knew that kind of thing existed, really, that feeling existed or was common, until I started reading the experiences of other people.
Yeah. And also, another thing that I don't think we talk about is that a successful IVF does not cure you of those feelings of being an infertile person. And I am too old. I couldn't have a baby if I wanted to right now. That ship has well and truly sailed. But when I see a pregnant person, or a friend of mine tells me they're pregnant, I still get a little pang of like, oh, well, that's not fair. And then I'm like, no, wait, I'm done with this. I've had my baby. Like, that kind of sticks around. And that is one of the struggles, that you are never really cured of infertility. Like, when you've experienced it and gone through it, and had to medicalize something that comes naturally to so many people, or that we are told from a young age will come naturally. In fact, it'll come so naturally that you need to go way out of your way to make sure it doesn't happen. And then you really struggle to have it happen. And you end up spending a lot of money when your friends didn't have to spend a lot of money. And you have to go to all these doctors and clinics and give yourself injections and go through and be scanned and have a bunch of people sticking things in you all the time. That doesn't just go away when you have a baby. You carry that with you. You process it. I mean, I feel like for the most part, I've processed it, but it doesn't go away. And we don't really talk about that unless we find a community of people where we are in a safe place to share those feelings. And I think that's such a huge part of the support. And I think that's a big part of what Hazel and I try to do, is say, this question you have is not a stupid, if it's a question, you're not going to be the only person who's ever wanted the answer to that question. And, you know, it's safe. You can ask it. We are here to answer it. And that's, I know that's what motivates me. I think that's what motivates Hazel to just say, you don't have to be alone during this experience. We can hold you up. We'll walk you through it. And I know that that's important to both of us.
And just kind of wading in on that. And even after my job as a midwife and everything that I do in this space, it blows my mind that people have sex and get pregnant. I'm like, what?
I know. How did anyone ever have a baby ever? I don't understand. I know.
It's just, you know, and if we're talking about stupid questions, like that's a really strange statement, but it does, and that this experience will impact you forever in the way you see things and the way you see parenting and pregnancy, and like you say, that's all completely normal.
So my daughter, I would take my injections in front of her, in part because I think she was afraid of needles and I wanted to like normalize needles for her. And that's now how she thinks babies are made.
Mm.
Yeah, well, she's not wrong in her case.
She's not wrong, no.
She's not wrong. Ladies, thank you so very much for your time this morning, for being so generous with sharing your stories. I think the more of these stories we hear, the more normal it seems, because it is many, many women's experience. And it's always an honor to be able to talk to women like you, Hazel. You know, I value my collaboration with you very much. Lisa, thank you so much. We wish you all the very, very best for your upcoming little lady. And I just want to thank you all for joining me today. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
And if anybody is watching, you know, if you can find me online, you can feel free to reach out and DM or PM or whatever.
Thanks, Lisa. Be well.
Thank you.